Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, November 7th, 2017. That makes it Election Day in some number of states across the country. Not all of you, of course, have off-year elections the way we do here in Virginia. I moved here from New Jersey many years ago, so I have made a pledge a long time ago. Probably you did too. You're behind on it if you also pledged to live only in states with off-years elections. I don't know why I did that. That really limited my options. But they're voting in actually a number of states on a number of different things, but not always for elected office. There are some ballot questions. There are some special elections around the country. You can round it all up, of course, on the front page of Daily Kos because it's their job to know what elections are going on this morning. In fact, the Morning Digest tells us all about that. That's their job also. Daily Kos elections in particular. That would really be their job. They would really have screwed up if they didn't tell you there was an election going on today. I have not voted yet. I am working from the basement of Kagro in the Morning World headquarters once again today in exile. Work continues here. I'm building a voting booth in my bathroom. I don't know if I mentioned to you exactly what we were doing here. All the demolition has been leading up to this. We have a nice new toilet to put in it. I don't think most of you have that in your voting booths, but I'm going super deluxe. I'm going to put in one of the Donald Trump gold ones, and I figure if he can tweet from there, I should be able to vote from there. A lot of you think it's really super liberal and progressive to say, well, let's all vote by mail. I say vote from the toilet, and that's I think I've out-progressived you on that one. So I'm more liberal and more progressive than the rest of you. So there, even Bernie Sanders says so. It's true. Donna Brazile is on board with my plan as well, and I think that will win some of you over. So others of you will shy away from this. But I figure if you're going to have to wait in line all that time to vote, you should be able to have at least a porta potty close at hand. Anyway, I haven't voted yet. It is my plan to do so. I live within walking distance of my polling station. Everyone should, but they don't. We hide the polling stations from quite a lot of you, and it's a big pain in the butt to go out there and get that voting. Another good reason, actually, to have toilets there, probably. But at any rate, you should go and do it. If you don't live in a state where there's voting going on, you should immediately move. If you're time travelers, let us know. We have to do anything we can to win these elections. Big question mark out there in a lot of these races, and the big question mark that's looming. You're not supposed to talk about this sort of thing because it's conspiracy theory, but I was just wondering this morning. I guess we'll throw it out there. We'll duck the question because I don't know how to answer it. But does anybody think that if for some reason, let's say the elections were to come out the opposite of the way, I don't know, let's say the polls said they ought to, would we go into I don't trust polls mode, or would we go into I don't think this election was run correctly mode? And I guess underlying the whole question, of course, if they just outright changed the numbers on who voted for, how many people voted for whom, let's say here in Virginia, and made Ed Gillespie the governor of Virginia, does anybody have any confidence that any sort of follow-up investigation, let's say they just said, yeah, I did it. Does anybody have any confidence in our ability to say, well, then X, Y, Z will be the result? We'll do this. You know what I mean? We'll throw out the elections, or we'll have another go-around, or you're going to jail, or anything like that. Who would handle that? Certainly couldn't be the state under the direction of Ed Gillespie. I suppose it's possible for the current governor to try and take care of things before leaving office and having a new governor sworn in. And there will be a new governor regardless. We only do a one-term thing here in Virginia. And anyway, but you certainly couldn't have any follow-up from the federal government either. At this point, what do you do? I don't know. That's it's conjecture. It's conspiracy theory. It doesn't really, merit that much of our attention. Or I guess it used to not merit that much of attention. When things were normal, it didn't merit that much attention. You always want to, of course, have one eye on the integrity of the election process, but you know how we were about conspiracy theory. And now, of course, I guess it's a legitimate question because the president himself is insane and awfully stupid and horribly corrupt, and I don't really know what to do about it. We'll follow up on other stories that actually have basis in reality at some point today. Bill has started us off with a morning tweet, as usual, all the way from Portland, Maine. Daily Kos Radio is live now, and we are live today. I could have pre-recorded this little bit for you, too. So, you know what? I should have done it, and I would have said, I'm out voting, but I'm going to have plenty of time to vote. As I said, I live within walking distance. Plenty of stuff going on today, but I have time once I get the show uploaded and produced to have a leisurely stroll over. I will not miss it. I promise you that. I can at least promise you that. Neither will my wife miss it. My oldest son is not yet old enough to vote. Next year, perhaps we'll have to drag him to the polls. Let's see. Yeah. So next November he'll have made it. We'll have to make sure to get him registered in the year upcoming. And Daily Kos Radio, where was I again? Oh, yes, is live now. Thank you, Bill. Does Kagro X, that's me, hi, David Waldman. Does Kagro X really have Ed Gillespie tied up in his basement? Could be. I am in my basement. I'm willing to say that much. There's rope here, and there is a gubernatorial candidate here. There's no gubernatorial candidate here. But it would make a great story if there was. And if he was, would I host him in my house? I don't know if I would want to do that. Anyway, he's not here. I don't have him tied up in the basement. And that means I'm only willing to say he's not in the basement. Beyond that, I'm not going to comment any further. Okay, let's see. Other fun things that are happening. Oh, here's a story for you. You would have seen this one yesterday, and I didn't get a chance to comment on it because I didn't learn the facts surrounding the story until after I finished taping. And boy, did we cut it close on the taping thing. I worked all weekend to get the tape ready, and I got it done fine. Like, I was very proud of myself that by, about 9 o'clock p.m. on Sunday night, I was done, and I was emailing it to Scott for his early perusal, although I didn't think he was going to get a chance to really look at it until normal time. I like to be able to send it to him earlier than that, but okay, he had the weekend off, and that's the way it ought to be. And I'm sitting there all secure and having done all my work and my morning post and everything, and thank God, 7 o'clock in the morning, and remember that there was the time change going on too, although it was Monday morning. We were supposed to be used to it by then, but that never works. I always wish they would do the time. It would be horrible if they did the time change on Monday. You get the extra hour sleep. They should fall back on, do that on a Sunday. But I like the idea of being able to turn off the alarm and go back to sleep for an hour, although that doesn't really work. But on a Monday, imagine how many people would be late for work, early for work, all the people that would screw it up, I guess. Anyway, I'm still not used to it, but I woke up at what was 7 o'clock in the morning, probably because I felt like it was 8 o'clock in the morning, and I realized, oh my God, I didn't even send the tape to Justice. How we can't broadcast this thing unless I do. And of course, he's West Coast, so I'm sending it to him in the middle of the night at this point. But he's a conscientious guy, and he's up and awake all the time, early in the morning, because, a number of reasons, really. But one of them is, oh, my God, I have to run this radio station. And thankfully, he was there and able to plug this thing in just in time and get it run for you yesterday. What I didn't get a chance to update you on, what was happening live behind the scenes was me waking up and picking up the phone, because I'm an addict, and taking a look at what was going on, and here was the story. Do I have it in pocket? I don't know. The story was in what is now known as the Huff Post, I guess. And it was the story of the woman who was photographed, I don't know, like a week or two ago, riding her bicycle outside of the Trump National Golf Club in Virginia. And the presidential motorcade is going by, as it always is, because there's a constant shuttle back and forth between the White House and this golf club. This might have been the weekend that he went twice. And she's bicycling, they're passing her by. She's giving the presidential motorcade the finger. You know the story. You saw the picture, and I guess at this point, iconic photo. We'll call it iconic because why not? And she's given him the finger. And now there's a little bit of backstory to it, like, how annoying this motorcade is to the local area residents, and in particular to this woman who was bicycling. But she was also frustrated. She explained in the story that, Puerto Rico, still a disaster area, without electricity, without food and water, and he's golfing again and again and again, and she was just frustrated, and so she flips him the bird, and who knows whether he sees it or not. But a photographer in the motorcade does, and thinks it makes a fun picture, and takes the picture, and it did make a fun picture. The real story of the day was she got fired by her company basically because of this. And I mean, they have sort of an explanation, and there's kind of a thing that they cobbled together in order to make it work. I don't believe I even put the story aside for us but I remember it well, and I'll tell you why I remember it so well. So I read the story. You know the story. She was fired. Her company is a government contracting company, and so it makes a certain amount of sense. They're not wrong to think that if it were to get out that she worked there and that they didn't fire her, that Trump would be vindictive about it and try and hunt down. He would instruct his people to hunt down contracts with this company in it and eliminate them from the contract, insofar as that was possible, and probably wouldn't be, but he wouldn't care. And, whatever. But at least he'd be looking out to do no more contracting business with this company. They're not wrong about that assumption. Plenty wrong, perhaps, about how they handle things from there on in, but okay. And I think she probably acknowledges that. Anyway, they fired her. And the way they cooked up the way to do it was a little convoluted too. The story was that she had violated the company's social media policy, which is, ironic in several ways, not the least of which is she is the social media director for the company. So, presumably she knows what the social media policy is. She said it. And I'm pretty sure she does know. And she's probably I'm pretty sure that she figured on what the outcome could be, because she would be intimately familiar with the policy. And that is why, quite honorably, I guess, she went to the company and said, so this photo is circulating. And you can't tell, but it is me. And I guess rather than have it come back to you weeks later, that it's somehow identified as me, and only then, have you be caught flat-footed and then be embarrassed, and then you would be angry and fire me. There's some chance that if I come forward and tell you now that maybe you won't. Maybe you won't fire. I don't know whether that was her thinking, but the thinking was, could also have been this. Look, I'll be honest. This happened. I did this. I'll own up to it, because that's the kind of person I am. Whatever. Okay. Well, they decided it violated social media policy, not because a picture of her was taken and circulated online. That would be even more ridiculous than usual. They could try to find some other reason. But she had taken the picture, or people had circulated online, and people who recognized her because they know her personally, had shown it to her. And of course, you wouldn't have missed your picture of yourself ending up in the Washington Post, especially as it is your local paper, and seeing it circulate online, because you're alive as a human being. And in 2017, you will see these things. And so she thought that was funny. And so she used it as her avatar picture on Twitter, and her background picture on Twitter and Facebook and stuff like that. And that's where they got her. They said, okay, you're not allowed, according to our social media policy at this company, you're not allowed to put anything obscene or lewd on your social media profiles. Now, that may be an overbroad policy, but I guess she's in charge of that policy. And it may be that they say, well, you certainly can't have anything in your social media profile if you also are linked in any way to the company. But at any rate, I guess they reserve the right to review their employees' social media, which is a little disturbing, but okay. And they said, well, there it is. You chose that as your picture. You're giving the middle finger to somebody, or it's a picture of anybody giving the middle finger to anybody else. That's obscene. It's an obscene gesture. And so therefore you're in violation of our social media policy and you're fired. Now there's more background to it. And we'll get to, well, I'll tell you what that is. And that is that there was another employee of the company who also violated the social media policy previously, a man who did it, and a fairly senior director of some sort at that. And he violated it in the standard way. That is, it was found on his Facebook page, which prominently and repeatedly identified him as an officer of this company, or at least a prominent employee of this company. But in his personal interactions with others, political arguments, he called at least this one person that was reported, he calls this person says to them, "You're a effing libtard a-hole." Well, that probably violates the social media policy. In terms of, does that cross the threshold into lewd or obscene comments or behavior or photos? Yes, it does. Only in this case, the solution was for the company to say, you know what, erase that message, clean up your social media profile, and we'll keep you on. So he gets by, she does not. Now, I'll also have to say, she's the social media director. I assume that she had some hand in saying, yeah, let's not be total jerks here. Let's give the guy a chance to clean things up and keep his job and, just admonish him to take the social media policy seriously at this point. And so maybe she did it to herself, and maybe it's the case that they said, all right, well, because you're the social media director, we had hoped for better from you, and it's one thing to give a pass to somebody who's not the social media director and is a thoughtless idiot, and let's give one more chance. Whereas if you were involved in developing the social media policy, we might say, yeah, the chance that you had was in becoming aware of the social media policy right up front as part of your job. I don't really think that, that doesn't totally justify it. And of course, there's the element of double standard for men versus women, etc. Now, she has no regrets, apparently, about what she decided to do. And that's nice. I like that is the case. And she says, I'd do it again. And she has designs on working at a more progressive outfit after this. That would be nice also. And by the way, we might as well say what she's looking for. In case you're listening, Planned Parenthood, and somehow this message didn't reach you, Planned Parenthood, and I guess also PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, also on her list. But she may have just been throwing out anything that she could think of, the sort of progressive employment she might be interested in. If you've got room for her, she's got some skills. Yes, let's take her on. Now, the third part of the story that I thought I would save up for the end here. Is it time for a break yet? No, not quite. Okay, almost there. I'm wasting a lot of time. But this was the thing. I read the story, and eyebrows up. Oh, look at the story. Oh, look at this. Oh, double standard. Oh, my goodness. Oh, this is really unfair. I hope someone offers her a job. And then it hit me. Do I have, where's my dramatic sound effects? There, I never have it at hand. All right, I'm overplaying my hand here. Here's what happened. I'm reading the story, and my wife is not yet awake. But I had to wake her up for this one. And I showed her the story. And she read it, and, she read the headline like, okay, so, that's a terrible story and all that, but what does that have to do with me? Keep reading the story. So remember, I live in the general area, yes, of Trump National Golf Club in Virginia. Thankfully, his traffic doesn't get in my way very frequently. But of course, she's now reading the story, and the woman is now named in the story. And I guess it's a matter of public record at this point. So we don't do her any disservice by saying her name is Julie Briskman. And there it is. So I read on. A local woman was Julie Briskman. And now she's not a relative, and she's not a close friend of ours that we visit with frequently, but we know her. We totally know her. I guess probably for the sake, everyone's sake, we won't say in what capacity we do know her, but it's just socially and through activities in town, we know her. And she's very nice, and I'm proud of her for standing up and doing what she did, and I could totally see her doing that. And I hope that this episode ends positively for her. But also, I will say a lot of people were saying to me, not because I said, hey, I know her, but because they were annoyed about the whole situation and her losing her job. Does she have, someone said, lots of people said, point me as soon as you can to her GoFundMe page. Surely there's a GoFundMe page for us to help her over this rough spot having lost her job. And I don't know if there is, and I don't know if she'll tell me if there is one. I don't know if it's really quite appropriate for me to ask her, but we'll see. And if I find out, I'll tell you this. If I find out that she's got one and I can actually legitimately confirm, if she says to me personally, yes, this is it and this is the page, I will happily pass that on and let everybody know and publicize the hell out of it. I would love to see her raise a bunch of money. What a great thing it would be for her to not have that worry hanging over her head on top of all the rest of this stuff. So we'll see. I'll find out. So if I can personally verify it for you, I will let you know, and we can all chip in a couple of bucks. Okay, anyway, that was sort of fun. It was a fun way of beginning the morning yesterday. I walked around thinking about that all day. I know the person that actually did that. I was saying I could set up a service of standing outside of Lowe's Island Golf Club, now known as Trump National for whatever reason. And I could give him the finger, and I would, for $20, I'll hold a sign that has your name on it so that when the photo is taken, you get fired. The value of the service diminished greatly over this past weekend, I guess. And I had no takers anyway. But I also didn't advertise it in any way, shape, or form, like this show. So, let's see. What other fun things are going on that we ought to bring you up to speed on? Well, I don't know. I guess there's some stories in the news. Wilbur Ross is in trouble again. I mentioned yesterday that Wilbur Ross was involved in the whole Paradise Papers thing. And that could probably take a week to parse through. Two things that could take an entire week. The Paradise Papers, which is what they're calling sort of the follow-up to the Panama Papers. Panama is very insulting to Panama because there's the Panama Papers, which is, Panama, crap country, right? Panama Papers. That's all we have to say about it. It's alliterative, and that's all you need to know. What about papers that come out of other countries? Well, the countries happen to be, let's say, like the Cayman Islands and Bermuda and all these offshore banking areas, many of which are in the Caribbean, although they also mentioned the Isle of Man, which is not necessarily paradise, but it's out there. And it's an island. And so people think of islands that way. Paradise, right? Rikers Island, paradise. Plum Island, if you remember from Silence of the Lambs. What other fun islands are there? There's Devil's Island from the movie Papillon, right? It didn't exist in real life. France didn't really use it as a penal colony. It only existed in the movie. And more and more island paradise is becoming known these days, like Frederick Douglass. And anyway, those are paradise. Panama. Okay, whatever. Anyway, so the basic story here is hundreds of very, very, very rich people are hiding their money offshore. I think we all knew that. Some of them are liberals and progressives and super, I don't know, maybe socialist even, who knows. And they're hiding their money, and that's what rich people do. And that's the answer to that. But Wilbur Ross, among many, caught up in there. And I think he's probably the first, and maybe not the only, cabinet member involved in this. And as a matter of fact, I think already we know that Ben Carson somehow shows up in all this. I said there were also liberals, big splash made yesterday. Bono from U2 also in there. But I think he came preloaded in the Paradise Papers. I think there was no choice. As soon as you procure a copy of the Paradise Papers for yourself, it's already embedded just as it is with an iPhone. So it might not be entirely valid anyway. But there's more. Wilbur Ross was hiding money. And he's a huge liar and a scumbag. And, of course, the owner of the Sago mine and a coal miner murderer. I don't really know why there wasn't more reaction to that among the coal mining community that's still waiting to have their jobs given back to them by Donald Trump. We have a story somewhere tucked away on that. But he's hidden a tremendous amount of assets and was... I was going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say, and less than entirely forthcoming, let's say, with disclosure as required and with his testimony before the committees examining his nomination to be Commerce Secretary. But in fact, he just lied in huge, huge ways. And he's caught dead to rights, just as Jeff Sessions now is. And what we're learning is that there really is no penalty whatsoever built into just blatantly lying your ass off in a confirmation hearing. And I think we've known that for a long time, but we rarely get as crystalline an example as we got with, well, Tom Price, for one, now resigned. So maybe, I think that's supposed to pass for a penalty. And we got the same for Jeff Sessions. I think we're also finding out the same basically for Ryan Zinke, who's turning out to be quite an elitist, by the way. And we could go to that story as well. But Wilbur Ross lied his ass off about how much money he had, how much divesting he had done, where he was hiding money, what he was involved in, and what business ties he had. And the big splash yesterday was he's super tied up in one or another business deal in which also is involved prominently members of Vladimir Putin's family. We could read the story, and perhaps we will, although now I've talked my way to the break. But we also have new developments this morning on Wilbur Ross. He's a big giant liar about how rich he is, and that doesn't really do very much for us. It doesn't get us rid of him, but it allows us at least to say there's a huge pattern of being a jackass liar, this time from rich people. So you know it must be true, I guess is what we're saying here. Forbes magazine did an inquiry into this, and I saw it written up in Raw Story. As usual, it is Raw Story that has the better headline here. Trump's Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross has been lying about being a billionaire for years, says this report from Forbes magazine. Does that remind you of anyone that he might be close to? And of course, a lot of the lying has to do with fabricating projects that he was involved in with Donald Trump. More about that after this. Wow, well, that was a huge failure. We're back. I didn't realize that there was going to be auto-playing video, although why, I didn't know that HuffPost was going to do that to me. I thought I would open up the story so that I could make sure I had it in hand to share with Scott, and of course they decided to intrude on the show. I would apologize to the folks up in Rochester, New York about this one, except they're not listening this morning, or at least not on Rochester Free Radio any longer. I mentioned to you last week that we have wound up that experiment. Those of you in the Rochester area, if you're not listening to our feed on Netroots Radio or picking up the podcast elsewhere, are listening to Tom Hartman, who's a fine fellow, but probably didn't need to be played again on that station or any other at this point. He doesn't need the exposure. But, you know, that's the story of all of our lives in the progressive circles, I would guess. It's a problem among bloggers and podcasters, etc. We have gigantic stars and then the long tail where the rest of us exist. And what can you do? I mean, the guy puts a lot of money and time and effort into producing a fine and professional show. And we don't, and those are the results, I guess. Anyway, where were we? We were talking about Wilbur Ross and trying to decide on the fly just how much time to spend on the guy. Ultimately, I think the decision here is move on from Wilbur Ross, other than saying, we'll read you the Raw Story report on the Forbes report. And I would recommend, as they do, Brad Reed wrote up the story for Raw Story, and he makes very clear the last thing on the way out the door for his piece is the link. The link is also up at the top, but he reminds you at the bottom. The entire report from Forbes is worth reading, and it is. I skimmed it. There's some great nuggets in there, but I can't spend the show on Wilbur Ross. And if I begin, I will. But here's the gist of it from Brad Reed, and this is the tremendous value of Raw Story. They give you the best stuff right off the top. Trump's Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross has been lying about being a billionaire for years, according to their report. Trump Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross has been lying about his net worth for well over a decade now, a bombshell Forbes report alleges. And he's still worth a tremendous amount of money. And it's weird that people lie about this stuff, but egos are strange things, and I don't know what benefit there might have been. It may have been just the richer I make Donald Trump think I am, the more chance I can skim some money off of that guy or become Commerce Secretary. I can't imagine he thought about that 10 years ago or whatever. But it may just be part of the culture of rich a-holes that they do this stuff. Forbes says that it first started having suspicions about Ross's net worth after it examined the financial disclosure forms he filed after being nominated by Trump to lead the Department of Commerce. Time out on that one, just by way of making another parallel for you. I'm sure it just occurred to you. I guess he's been successfully hiding his net worth from Forbes and therefore the world for a long time. I guess there's a story there in Do We Trust, a magazine dedicated to celebrating rich people, to tell us who's rich and who isn't. Do we care about whether they do an accurate job? They apparently do. That's great. Is it disgusting that there's even a Forbes magazine? Maybe. I don't know. I mean, they bring us good information every once in a while. That's not what I came here to debate. I guess what I came here to say about that particular, I'm just like Donald Trump in this. I know. But I'm not a dotard yet. Getting close. I'm about 50 years old. I guess it's about time to start. I'll get an AARP card soon. I should get a dotard card too, I guess. That's ageist, but it's about me, so maybe it's okay. Anyway, Forbes, they had their suspicions, but their first suspicion doesn't come years ago when he enters their list of richest people. It comes with the financial disclosure forms, which is why Donald Trump won't make any financial disclosures. I'm not showing you my taxes. Armando's been right about this the whole time. I won't show you my taxes because then you'll know how rich I really am, which is plenty rich, but not as rich as I say I am, and you'll know I'm a giant liar. I already know you're a giant liar, so does everybody else. You lie about everything. We've heard it before. You'll lie about what time it is just for the practice. I know you're a liar about your golf. I did see, by the way, over the weekend, he finally posted a score officially on the online handicapping site. During his presidency, he usually just skips it, and that's okay. Most people probably do. He posts a 68, he claims, at Trump National here in Sterling. And, of course, it may have been the same weekend as or subsequent weekend to the weekend in which, was it Rand Paul, who's now also in the news, or Lindsey Graham, who said, oh, yeah, he's fantastic. He shot maybe a 72, 73. So he also posted a 68. I don't know if that's the same round. That would be really hilarious. These guys lie for him and say he's scored a 72, 73, and he posts a 68. Anyway, a 68, 72, 73 would have put you in the lead or perhaps tied for second in the Senior PGA Open event, which was held at that very golf course, to give you some idea of how fantastic a score he's claiming to have. He could be, he keeps saying he's a professional level golfer, and those scores would have put him in the running for a tremendous purse on the Senior PGA Championship. Not just any Senior PGA event, but the Senior PGA Championship. So if you believe that, you're dumb. I have no finer point to put on it than that. I have nothing clever to tell you. Anyway, so he's a liar about everything, and we know this. And finance is not the least of it. And now it turns out Wilbur Ross is pretty much the same. I would bet that almost everybody at the billion-plus level is lying to some extent, or giving you a sunny picture anyway of what their net worth is when it pays to do that. Of course, come tax time, they love to plead poverty. But, I guess the idea here is when there are supposedly penalties for lying about your worth, we suppose that people are slightly more honest. I don't know why we think that. People cheat on their taxes all the time. And that's because there aren't really severe penalties, and most people get away with lying on that stuff. And anyway, so it isn't until he's forced to disclose something that Forbes catches on to the fact that he's a big fat liar. And I shouldn't be saying fat, obviously. I was admonished earlier this morning as well. But I'm saying it in the colloquial sense of big fat anything. But I guess we ought to eliminate that, just like we eliminate other words that we grew up with on the playground and they're not nice. So he's a big liar. He's a jackass and a liar, and we don't like him. And that's what really counts. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting. So not only is it in parallel to Trump about lying about how much he's worth, but parallel to Trump in that he knows he's going to get caught when it comes disclosure time. Anyway, in all, the Raw Story report continues, the forms showed that he had assets worth about $700 million, which is lots, but is far below the $3.7 billion he had claimed to be worth and below the $2.9 billion that Forbes had believed he was worth. So, there should be something to this in the journalistic community that this guy misled them so badly. Ross initially told Forbes that he had shifted $2 billion into family trusts prior to being nominated for Commerce Secretary by Trump, which meant that he did not have to disclose it, but really means that he really should have disclosed it because he's still in control of it. But then again, why bother? Because that's Trump's MO. He moved assets into his family's name, and he still controls it, but says he's divested. So why should Wilbur Ross have to do any more? Well, the answer is, of course, what Trump did is illegal and wrong. But he's president of the United States, and we're not used to doing anything about it when the president of the United States does things that are illegal and wrong. So he gets away with this. That's the basic underlying theme here. Forbes, investigated the matter further and concluded that the $2 billion that he says he transferred into, this is an interesting twist. It's not that he transferred it into the name of family so that he wouldn't have to disclose it. It's that he said he transferred it into their name so that no one would be able to say, hey, I thought you had $2 billion more than this, and you don't. It never existed, they say. It seems clear that Ross lied to us, the latest in an apparent sequence of fibs, exaggerations, omissions, fabrications, and whoppers that have been going on with Forbes since 2004, the publication writes, and I think they did not mean this as broadly as I am going to take it, but they meant that that Wilbur Ross has been lying to them since 2004. I would venture to say that this has been going on with Forbes since 2004 and before. As soon as Forbes decided to report on who were the richest people in America or in the world and try and evaluate their net worth, everybody on the list began lying to them. I am willing to go out there on that one. I cannot back it up, but I promise you it's true. In fact, the Department of Commerce itself, Raw Story continues, in response to Forbes' questions about the $2 billion money transfer, flatly denied that any such transfer ever happened, despite the fact that Ross himself was the publication's primary source for the claim. The Department of Commerce says our secretary is a big fat liar. God dang it, I did it again. See, this is difficult. I got rid of some other words out of my vocabulary. I'm working on this one. I am wrong. I apologize. I don't know how else to put it, but I'm not doing any better so far in getting it out of my vocabulary. Forbes, I don't mean anything by it, but that's half the reason why I got to work so hard in getting it out of there. Forbes went on to interview 10 former employees at Ross's private equity firm who are perfectly fit individuals. Just want to say that in all likelihood. And it wouldn't matter even if they weren't. See, I'm still working on getting this right. We don't care. They are disembodied souls. Yes? I don't know. Is that, am I offending? I might be offending, atheists. Seriously. And okay. Forbes went on to interview 10 former employees at Ross's private equity firm, who I assume are also liars. How about that? But in this case, they're telling the truth, and they all painted a picture of a man who is serially dishonest about his net worth. I bet they are too, but okay. He's lied to a lot of people, said David Wax, who is surely honest, who was the top executive at W.L. Ross and Company and who worked alongside Ross for decades. I'm leaving the story. I'm sorry. I'm getting out of it. And I'm going to move on with other aspects of it. Anyway, Raw Story, thank you for summing that up nicely. Yes, there's more. Yes, there's Paradise Papers stuff. Yeah, we'll touch on some of that stuff. One, NBC News. Paradise Papers leaks show that Wilbur Ross hid ties to Putin cronies, and we should get that on the record. What are we talking about? Let's get down to the good stuff here. Ross, it says a billionaire industrialist, so I don't know whether any of that part of it is true. He's clearly not a billionaire, according to Forbes. Industrialist, ? Don't even know what that means. Retains an interest in a shipping company, Navigator Holdings, It's a brilliant name for a shipping company. That was partially owned by his former investment company. One of Navigator's most important business relationships is with a Russian energy firm controlled, in turn, by Putin's son-in-law and other members of the Russian president's inner circle. Some of the details of Ross's continuing financial holdings, much of which were not disclosed during his confirmation process, are revealed in a trove of more than 7 million internal documents of Appleby, a Bermuda-based law firm. By the way, if you want to crowdfund my visit to investigate the nearby environs, you can contribute, and I'll happily take a short vacation to Bermuda, come back and say didn't learn anything, but it was very nice. The documents come from Appleby, a Bermuda-based law firm, leaked to the German newspaper by this German name. Holy mackerel. Süddeutsche Zeitung. So, bad German there, but that's who got it. The documents consist of emails, presentations, and other electronic data. Those were shared with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. That's the important group here, ICIJ, a global network that won a Pulitzer Prize this year for its work on the Panama Papers, and its international media partners. NBC News was given access to some of the leaked documents, which ICIJ calls the Paradise Papers, so you can blame them for that one. Anyway, that's the basics of it. Let's see. There's also this information. More than 120 politicians and royal rulers around the world were identified in the leak as having ties to offshore finance, which is not by itself illegal, but the New York Times reported on Sunday that the documents also contain references to offshore interests held by Gary Cohn, Trump's chief economic advisor, and Secretary of State Rex Everything Tillerson. Of course, that was inevitable as well. No evidence of illegality, they point out, in their dealings. But let's see. Is there more information about Ross and his holdings, and exactly, are there any names involved? Do we know which Russians to look out for? Are there other dots to put on our map here? Let's see if they're in this report. I should have highlighted this report earlier, except Pocket has no highlighting ability, and so I was going to be frustrated in all of that. Okay. Well, we'll keep up on this stuff. Here we are. One of the owners of Sibur, S-I-B-U-R. That's, I guess, the Russian petrochemical giant involved in Navigator's backing. According to Navigator's 2017 SEC filing, Sibur, S-I-B-U-R, once again, was listed among its top 5 clients based on total revenue for the 2 previous years. And we're talking about 2016, $23 million in revenue from Sibur and $28.7 million the following year. One of the owners of Sibur is Gennady Timchenko, a Russian billionaire on the Treasury Department's sanctions list. That's problematic. He's been barred from entering the U.S. since 2014 because authorities consider him a specially designated national, or SDN, who is considered by Treasury, the Treasury Department, to be a member of the Russian leadership's inner circle, which ought not usually by itself get you barred from entering the U.S., except the Russian leadership's inner circle is considered essentially to be an organized crime outfit, so that's a problem on a number of levels. The Treasury Department stated that Timchenko's activities in the energy sector have been directly linked to Putin, and that Putin had investments with a company previously owned by Timchenko, as well as access to the company's funds. There's more to it, of course. Another major Sibur shareholder is Leonid Mikhelson, who, like Timchenko, has close ties to the Kremlin. One of his companies, Novatech, Russia's second largest natural gas producer, and I do feel like we have a rotating cast of first and second largest natural gas producers, a little bit like Al-Qaeda there. Also placed on Treasury's sanctions list in 2014. Is there more? Let's continue on. A third shareholder of Sibur and deputy chairman of the board is Kirill Shamalov, my best guess at that one, husband of Vladimir Putin's daughter, Katerina Tikhonova. I hope I'm pronouncing that one correctly, or I'll be murdered. After the wedding, Shamalovs, You got any idea on how he does that one? Meteoric rise, again, a phrase that bothers me. Meteoric rise to wealth led him to own as much as 21.3% of Seabor's stock until April, when he sold off around 17% for a reported $2 billion. Okay, more comment on this here. It's a new generation, this group, this gang that we've just named, which is currently being prepared and groomed, dangerous word, to inherit whatever power and wealth Putin's team has accumulated over the past years, said Vladimir Milov, a former deputy energy minister in Putin's government who's now working with the opposition. Dangerous job. Milov said companies like Sibur are often the way sanctioned Kremlin insiders have to keep doing business despite restrictions. So, okay, we're getting the idea here. Getting down towards the end of the article as well. So let's let them sum it up. The Commerce Department stated Ross never met Timchenko, Mikkelsen, or Shamalov. It said he was not on the board of Navigator in March 2011 when the ships in question were acquired. I guess there was a particular transaction or two. Or the following February when the charter agreement with Sibur was signed. It said Sibur was not under U.S. sanctions itself. Now, or in 2012, I guess when his investment started, the statement said Ross was on the board of Navigator from March 30th, 2012 to 2014, and that no funds managed by his company ever owned a majority of Navigator's shares. But, as The Guardian reported on Sunday, other public documents suggest a different story. What do you know? Lying again. A Navigator news release on March 2nd, 2012, said that Ross was already on the board at that point, and Sibur's annual report for 2012 said the deal with Navigator was signed in March. In addition, Ross's company issued a news release on August 10th, 2012, saying that the company had agreed to acquire a majority stake in Navigator. Let's see. So, essentially, one of the difficulties in prosecuting all this, besides the fact that these are people in high places and who have favors due to them by other higher-ups and official figures, is that they have a history of lying and having the mechanisms at their control lie on their behalf as well. So, it's actually almost partially a legal defense. Why does Wilbur Ross perhaps not mind so much being called out as a liar about his finances? Because then all of the public paper trail that would prove his corruption can be called into question. Maybe none of this was ever true, and therefore I am not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and I get to skate. Do I think it's an affirmative defense? I don't know. I'm not sure where it's coming from. I don't know whether he's just going to be the beneficiary of a happy, idiotic accident or what. But it wouldn't surprise me if that was the way it came out. Okay. Other things on the horizon. Well, let's see. Some of these things are tweets that I have to open up to remind myself of what people were tweeting. Yes, another story that we can't get to today because it would encompass the entire week, apparently, but we'll wait for the professionals to help digest this stuff. The Carter Page interview transcript. He appeared before one or another of the various congressional investigative committees and apparently ended up producing a 200-plus page transcript in which he basically, I don't know, word is he's like blathering about everything and ends up, admitting basically to like 100 different crimes and then insisting that the transcript be made public. And now I'm worried that he's also following the same thing. There's all sorts of fantastic allegations that could be made based on this. But in the end, if he just says, I made it all up, I've been a liar from day one, where do we go from there? The chaos, right, has been sown, and will we ever dig our way out of this? I don't know. But I liked this comment from Dan Friedman, who, of course, covers foreign influence and national security for Mother Jones, according to his Twitter bio. I thought this was a great comment on it. This Carter Page transcript, he said, reminds me of the Unabomber making everyone read his stuff. He says so because here's the first part, his kickoff of 4 single-spaced pages of typed material, just for 4 pages, to assert his Fifth Amendment rights, which is an amazing thing. He takes 4 pages to say he's not going to say anything, and then produces 200 pages worth of transcript. I don't know what to make of this, but to give you an idea of the flavor of what he has to say, Dear Special Counselor Mueller, Senator Burr, Senator Warner, Congressman Nunes, Congressman Conaway, and Congressman Schiff. Now that he's done telling you who he's addressing, this is his version, the beginning of his version of invoking the Fifth Amendment. Remember, basically that you don't have to say anything is the amendment. Nothing self-incriminating, anyway. In the 225-year history since our Constitution's Bill of Rights was ratified on December 15th, 1791, oh my God, like sovereign citizen here. Okay. No common law precedent has existed for Article 1 or Article 2 institutions to request that an individual or their advisors compile massive quantities of irrelevant data or provide testimony after that individual has already been illegally wiretapped based on false evidence and the felonious disclosure of information regarding such an unlawful search had previously been made available to the public. In the wake of last year's extreme obstruction of justice that allegedly occurred in the U.S. Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, I am writing to inform you that it is my intention to exercise the constitutional protections offered by the privileges of the Fifth Amendment. Whereas the historic civil rights abuses committed against me, committed against me have verifiably represented a witch hunt first aimed directly at myself since the very beginning of these illegitimate efforts by the U.S. federal agencies, the Congress and media adversaries of Mr. Donald J. Trump, to illicitly influence the U.S. presidential election through outrageous false information in the months leading up to November 8th, 2016, footnote, initially during his campaign as a candidate, and forget it. That's the end of the excerpt. You get the idea. It's like putting a sovereign citizen on the stand, and very little different from there. But one of these days, this week, I'm sure, we'll parse through what is being digested by the journalism pros from this garbage. Well, let's see. We also have this interesting entry, just by way of giving you a flavor of what was going on in the Paradise Papers stuff about Bono. Bono, really? Yes. Charles Pierce picks up on that story. And, I mean, I don't know whether it's worth telling you, like, what he did, but I wanted to point out that he has a piece on this. And if you're going to read about Bono in the Paradise Papers, it might as well be in entertaining fashion by Charles Pierce. And I will provide that to you in today's roundup via Scott. And I think that'll be all for the day, probably directly on the Paradise Papers anyway. Moving on, let's see, other interesting developments we'll borrow one from Daily Coast World. Hunter put this one up yesterday, and I found it when it finally made its way to the front page. This will be no surprise to you, but it just establishes the fact Russian Twitter accounts started backing Trump almost immediately after his campaign announcement. Not surprising, of course, in hindsight. But also really just now that I think about it, you'll remember they've got the piece is illustrated with the picture of him descending the golden escalator because, of course, he can't actually handle stairs, and giving the famous stupid-ass thumbs up. And behind him are all the people we know who were revealed to be paid actors, and they've acknowledged as much, I think, and they even said so in their FEC filings that they paid these people to show up at the announcement. The thing was artificial from the start, and I'm wondering whether it might not have been just sort of they were interested in getting Russians involved because I wonder whether the Russians offered him the opportunity to boost his Twitter following artificially with a bunch of bots and maybe purchased them. I know he definitely purchased followers, but I don't know if that were, if they were Russian generated necessarily. But I wouldn't be terribly surprised. But I wonder whether in the spirit of saying, well, look, I'm going to start up a campaign from scratch. I got nothing. I got no supporters. I'll hire them. That doesn't bother me. Maybe I will hire followers on Twitter too. But that has yet to be established that the ones he bought were either Russian generated or whether the Russians said to him, by the way, I know you love Twitter and we can make you a superstar with our own bots. Anyway, Hunter writes it up. It's a day of the week, so it's time for new revelations about the scope of Russian attempts to manipulate public opinion in favor of Donald Garbage Fire Trump. Today's other revelation, the effort to boost Trump and sow opposition to his opponents started within weeks from his descent on his golden escalator. Russian Twitter accounts posing as Americans began lavishing praise on Mr. Trump and attacking his rivals within weeks after he announced his bid for the presidency in June of 2015, according to the analysis by the Wall Street Journal. In the 3 months after Mr. Trump announced his presidential candidacy, that would be June 16th, 2015, tweets from Russian accounts reviewed by the Journal offered far more praise for the real estate businessman than criticism. Not a surprise, of course, especially given what we know now. But this was, it was really super lopsided. This would be a nearly 10-to-1 margin in favor of Trump from the Russian bots. At the same time, the accounts generally were hostile to Mrs. Clinton and the early GOP frontrunner Jeb Bush by equal or greater margins. We'll return to this storyline after this next break for nothing. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show. Just our short break, as I said, for nothing. It hit me as I was going out. I'm used to saying that we're taking a short break for station identification, and it occurs to me that, during this break, we're probably not identifying any stations whatsoever, although most of you who are listening to the live feed didn't necessarily hear any station identification during our old breaks. But I could have eliminated the breaks. I could have gone to a format of, let's say, allowing language not suitable for broadcast, but I think we'll continue with this format. It's always nice to have a break or the opportunity. Oh, for instance, I forgot to silence the phones again today. I still haven't gotten that part of the routine down, so hopefully that doesn't ring anytime soon. But it's nice to be able to get a break for taking a sip of water or running to the bathroom, neither of which I have taken advantage of today, in case you were wondering. Too disgusting. I can't talk about it. But, anyway, when emergencies arise, it's always nice to be able to have breaks in which to take care of them. When we left off, we were reading about Hunter discussing the quickness with which the Russian Twitter bots jumped in on Trump's behalf, as he said, just weeks after his announcement for the presidency, as though they knew something about what he was really like or what they could get out of him or what they might be able to do. I'm not certain that they knew offhand that they were going to succeed in all this, and it may just have been that they thought they could have some fun screwing with American elections. But I don't know that that would have been enough for the Russian government to have invested, if they invested, and I guess that's still a big question mark, in screwing around with the outcome, even if they didn't think they were going to change who was going to become president. Although the motivation was there, certainly. They were just as happy to have a weakened and undermined Hillary Clinton in office, or for that matter, if things had gone another way, a weakened and undermined Bernie Sanders in office, or a weakened and undermined Jeb Bush, for that matter. It didn't really matter to them in June or July of 2015 who won. They were going to do pretty much the same thing that they had in mind and call it a plan to undermine some other eventual winner, if not to enjoy some fruits of having Donald Trump be the winner. But I wonder whether it also does make me think that it might have been an affirmative plan originating with the Trump camp, if for no other reason than to just sort of, we know he was probably thinking of running for president just to enhance his brand, But I guess the question of, well, what makes you think you could ramp up into a national campaign and give a serious go at it, or maybe even not so serious go at it, from out of nowhere when you have no political operatives on your team? And the answer might have been, well, I know that I can just buy followers and I can buy influence in social media from the Russians. I've seen what they do. I know what their capabilities are. Jared knows all about it. And maybe I wonder whether when Donald himself began thinking about it, whether or not Jared said, well, you know, I mean, with a little bit of money, I could buy you what looks like a campaign base in a box and make it look like you're much more popular online and elsewhere in America than you really are. I mean, he would have had to put that delicately because Donald Trump believes he's the most popular guy in the world, period, and always was. But anyway, this is, I'm not sure which came first here, or which one's the chicken and which one's the egg in all this. Let's see. Anyway, I'll continue with this thing and then we will head off in other directions as well. And there's more to follow up on. I see Armando. I see your message. Hang on. We'll get to that one in just a second. Where were we with this? Yes. It's an interesting bit of information that the trolls were out in force so quickly, says Hunter, because it indicates that the Russian troll farms were much quicker to rally to Trump than has been previously supposed. U.S. intelligence services have previously supposed, at least in their public interpretations of events, that Russian efforts were focused merely on sowing discord during the elections, but only moved toward favoring Trump specifically late in the campaign. This muddles that theory a little bit, or he says muddies. That theory a little bit, but I have an alternative theory. It wasn't a piecemeal effort either, he says. Many political messages were sent out word for word by multiple Russian-backed accounts, often within minutes of each other, suggesting a coordinated campaign. As to why the Russian troll farms jumped so quickly to Trump's side, even when nobody else in the world considered his candidacy to be anything other than a narcissistic summer joke, that's up for speculation. I've just speculated it. They bought it. They knew that they needed that. And they knew probably from Jared, maybe from the Cambridge Analytica branch of everything too, although they were so far at that point in the Ted Cruz camp, but maybe Steve Bannon knew differently. But Jared supposedly knew this sort of thing. I can buy you the support it will take to jumpstart this campaign, and it can be done by paying Russians, and they'll be only too happy to cover our tracks because it would be otherwise espionage. Not that they really fear that they would be sanctioned or prosecuted for it, but they might as well try to keep it quiet for as long as possible. All it takes is cash, and although that's difficult for us to come by, we can leverage it out of something somewhere and pass it on to the Russians. Or just the promise of cash later will probably do the trick. Anyway, it could be, Hunter continues, that Trump, obviously stupid and barely able to get the words out of his word hole, was immediately seen as the worst possible candidate and therefore the one that would be the most hilarious to promote. Or it may have been a more calculated decision based on past Russian interactions with Trump and his extended circle of money laundering friends. Moron or no, this was a man who had a proven history of doing unsubtle favors for Russians that needed favors done. Hard to say. It's difficult to believe Russia would put its not entirely unlimited resources towards screwing with the American election on a lark, given the international drama unleashed if and when such acts were revealed, but stranger things have happened. I favor my own theory, of course, which is that initially it was just Jared saying, I'll buy you some supporters and some boost online and we'll amplify your message. And then the further offerings of the menu of interference from the Russians were presented at a later date, and they may have opted into some of those, or those may have been imposed on him regardless. I don't know. But I think that they made an initial decision to buy in. Anyway, let's see. Other things that are out there worth making mention of. Let's see. Oh, God, there's so much. Where shall we go? Man, there's more from Saudi Arabia, and how do we like having made that call yesterday? That's become a big story, as it should have, and I don't think that we had any influence on making it a big story. I simply say, I'm glad that I found time to include that yesterday in the show because it's blowing up and it's blowing up fast. And once again, it just shows we have a good news eye, I think, here on Kagro in the morning. And you too, because you have to, because you too is included in everything. They're embedded in everything. And you also have a good news eye. You're here for your news and analysis, and that makes a difference. There are places that would have missed this. I'm glad we got a chance to squeeze it in. Speaking of other things to squeeze in, I told you Armando is on something here. And I don't mean meth, but that's possible. He's been arguing further about the Donna Brazil situation and everything that emerges from it and everything that's tied to it, including the continued insistence that something has been rigged. I'm personally bothered just like syntactically by, I guess, a fundraising letter that allegedly the Bernie Sanders gang put out in the last couple of days, in which his shorthand for it is that the DNC was rigged. And that just bothers me as syntax. I don't know exactly what the hell he means by any of that, any part of it. But anyway, that apparently will not die, and lots of discussion about whether or not this is something that should absolutely not have been discussed in advance of the elections today. I'm not terribly disturbed by it because just personally, me and you, if you're listening to the show, I don't think any of us can imagine ever changing our voting, our plans to vote in this election as between Gillespie and his racist Trump campaign and anybody else. It doesn't matter to you. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to most of the millions of people who will turn out to vote today. What happened last year in the presidential election? It has nothing to do with it. There are very few people who are going to say, well, I'll risk, Virginia falling into Trumpist hands again. I'll risk Trump because of what Bernie Sanders supporters say, or maybe Donna Brazil says, about what happened in last year's presidential election. I very much doubt it, so I'm not too worried about that. But it's an ongoing controversy, and I did notice late in the game, not in real time, that Armando had gotten himself into an ongoing Twitter debate with Ben Spielberg, and apparently it has resulted in an invitation for Ben Spielberg to come on the show to discuss the rigging and DNC reforms. And Armando wants to know if we can have him on. And I did say, so Armando, are you going to take care of this? I mean, he'll make the arrangements, right? But are you going to come on the air and have that fight? Is this basically, I introduce the show and you fight? I mean, actually, that's not a bad format. I wouldn't mind doing that. I don't know whether it's something I should chime in on. I don't know. Well, we'll discuss it. Can we have him on? We can. Will he do it? Will he come in via Skype? Is it okay? Are we going to, what do we think? We'll have to evaluate whether we think this is going to make a good show. Well, we'll risk it. We're experimental here. Why don't we say yes to that? And I think it would be a fruitful discussion, or it could be a fruitful, is what I should hedge. It certainly could be in this sense. I mean, for me, I don't know what it's going to do for Armando. Armando's going to have a terrific time at it. And, you and me fighting. Yes. Is this it? Okay. You and him fight is the idea, but you can fight too. Or you, I don't understand. So are you having the argument with him, or am I supposed to have the argument with him? He would come on. He's said that much. I don't know. Am I interested in having a fight with him? That's a good question. Yeah, to some extent. I don't really feel like fighting about it, but I think you two guys could certainly fight and maybe even entertainingly, let's say, about whether or not there was any rigging going on or the validity of what Donna Brazil had to say. I would like to make this point at some point. I think we should have this discussion, because I've been having this discussion also in email and Daily Kos internal email with a couple of people, and a little bit on Twitter. It's very difficult to do without having a face-to-face discussion about it. Okay. Okay, and Armando says, you're scheduling yourself for the argument. Excellent. I'm glad we do. This is like the Monty Python sketch. We'll schedule your argument, and we'll see what comes of it. But we'll pick a day, we'll pick a time. We'll go forward with it from there. I think that there's a lot of discussion to be had about the mechanics of what's being asked for here and how do you do these things. Because there's a lot of frustrated Bernie Sanders supporters out there. And I want them to vote for Democrats, I guess. I mean, I think I do, right? I would like to see more Democrats win office in general because they're generally far better than, let's say, Nazi-affiliated Republicans and also non-Nazi-affiliated Republicans. They're just better in general. Are there more progressive people I'd rather see in certain spots? Yes. Do I think we would be able to win some of those elections where the incumbents are middle-of-the-roaders to conservative Democrats? Yes, I actually believe we can win some of those races, too. Clearly not all. I also believe that there are some that you will just never win, and you need a more conservative Democrat if you're going to put a D in that seat. And yes, I believe that's better in general than not putting one in there. I know that there are listeners who do not believe that. And that's just one of the differences that we will have as people have all the time. But the mechanics of how to do the things that Bernie Sanders supporters want to do or want to see done, perhaps more accurately, to the DNC and inside the DNC, I have questions about how you would do it mechanically. I know the answer, and I think you know the answer too, and there's a procedural part to all of this, but it generally comes down to this. My general feeling that I've expressed before about Bernie Sanders and his ability to have success in reforming the Democratic Party, whether he is a member or not, whether he joins and stays joined or not, but also, if he's doing it from an independent standpoint outside. Yeah, it's an easy thing to do, and I know it's facile in a way, and it disturbs Bernie Sanders supporters to no end to simply say, well, if he doesn't put the D label after his name, then whatever. He's disqualified from the conversation. It's like saying clip instead of magazine. Not quite where I'm coming from, not quite what I feel, but there's a human element to all this, and I've explained it before. You know where I'm going with this. The DNC is made up of human beings, and they make decisions. Some are good, some are not so good. Some are based in solid logic, some are based in something else. But those are the people to whom we've designated the vote, and they do vote, and it's largely done in the most democratic fashion that you can put together. And there's certainly room for improvement. There's unintended consequences to things we've implemented as reforms before. But by way of example, the superdelegates process. You know, if you're a longtime listener to the show, you were around when we explained the superdelegates and the reasons for their existence. That's a super sore point for Bernie Sanders supporters because so few of the superdelegates were willing to come out in support of Bernie Sanders. I don't need to explain the mechanics of why Bernie Sanders supporters were angered by the very existence of superdelegates, but maybe you weren't with us when we explained how they came to be. And here's the thing. Superdelegates in general were originally envisioned, I think, generally speaking, as a progressive reform. Not entirely, but at least in part. And some of you will remember from contemporaneously, from the fight, that the superdelegates were, it's not, the founding fathers didn't hand us superdelegates. They were an invention, and they were invented, and at the time they were put forth, by the way, by, I think one of the names that came up, right, in all of this was Tad Devine, who was at the time working with Bernie Sanders, and so the giant irony. Oh, it's so ironic. He had something to do with the creation of the superdelegates, and here he is now years later saying how horrible they are. Well, that's not hypocritical per se, although not acknowledging your role is probably hypocritical, but I think he acknowledges his role. You can come to realize later that they had unintended consequences that make you sad, and that's okay. But Can we even long story short on this one? Superdelegates. Who are they? Why do they exist? They're generally speaking, the vast majority of the superdelegates are elected officials, members, Democratic members of Congress and Democratic governors and a few others, former presidents, speakers of the House, etc., who are granted by virtue of the office they now hold or formerly held automatic voting status to the Democratic National Conventions, and that includes a vote on who will be the nominee, plus all the other things that the conventions vote on. One compromise that's floated out there is you can vote on all the platform junk and rules, etc., but not for the nominee. Okay. I mean, I still think that there's a good reason to allow them to vote for the nominee, but it's a compromise that's out there. But why do they get that? I mean, my favorite reasoning behind all of this is, as you know, the rest of the DNC and the voting delegates to the National Convention are elected by their own state and local Democrats, and a chain that goes all the way up from the local level, and you get bumped up, etc. But it's Democrats who have signed on to say, I'm part of the party and I want to help organize it, and they're asked, who do you want to be representing you at the next level up? And they vote. There's no more democratic way of doing that than voting. But, of course, there's the complaint, well, the universe of voters is slanted and biased towards insiders. And do you know how they get to be insiders? They walk inside. I mean, that's basically what's going on here. Is there are people who say, I want to be involved in this, and I'm going to volunteer myself to do that. And at some level, the next level up, where it has to be more exclusive because it can't just be every person in the country who's willing to declare themselves a Democrat coming to one convention and 65 million of them voting on something. You send up representatives. You know how that works here in a representative democracy, yes? You vote on who's going to go, and that's how you decide. It's not decreed by anyone. You vote on it. Now, some of the superdelegates, of course, are named by the party chair, and I think that's probably something we could scale way back or eliminate, but that has good reasons too. And the basic reasons for allowing superdelegates at all is instead of having people who would otherwise qualify for superdelegate status, whose opinions you want in all of this, there's good reason for including the opinions, yes, of sitting members of Congress, Democrats, governors, etc., people who are in important positions or for a very select few who were formerly in those positions. We're talking about former presidents and vice presidents of the United States, not a whole lot of them. Former speakers of the House, former Senate majority leaders, not a whole lot of them either. But we want their opinion on who do you think would make the best chief executive of the United States? Who is our best nominee? Who would be best to work with? Who really knows what to do in this job and who doesn't? And I think that's a valuable opinion to have. They might not agree with me, but I think theirs is a valuable opinion to solicit. So I want that voice there. And here's how I want that voice to get there. I want to put it there. Why? Because we should automatically get out of their way? No. So that they don't have to go back to their local parties and ask to be sent there, not because they're so important that we can't have them sully their hands with elections. That's how they got there. They sully their hands with elections all the time. We know they can do that. We know they want to do that. We know they do that all the time anyway. The reason I don't want them in that contest is because if you as a Bernie Sanders supporter, let's say, want to be inside and reform. You've read your books. You understand how the process works. I want to be one of the insiders that makes things happen, that makes decisions, because I don't trust anybody else. Would it make sense, for instance, if you were from South Dakota? No, it wouldn't make any sense for you to live in South Dakota. You would leave, right? Except for you friendly South Dakotan folks, I love you. Please stay where you are. Don't come to this house and try to beat me up because I don't want to live in South Dakota. I think it would be lovely for, let's say, part of the year. I don't know. Anyway, you're from South Dakota. I'm just picking this because I'm going to go to Tom Daschle on this. Would it be fair if you wanted to be an insider as currently an outsider. You're a Bernie Sanders guy. You got a lot to say. You're a valuable voice. You want to stand for election. You're starting at the very bottom. You're in the local Democratic county meeting. You want to move up to the state level. And you have to stand for election for delegate to the state convention against Tom Daschle. Would that be a reasonable thing for you to do? To expect that you're going to get past that? No, that would be basically, you would probably say this is a rigged election, or at least I have no chance. Tom Daschle is a statewide elected official, or has been a statewide elected official in South Dakota since forever. He was majority leader. Everybody knows who he is. That name recognition is huge. Among who? Among people who show up for such votes at the county Democratic level. They know him, and they don't know you. You could try, you'd stand a chance, because the chances that he would come and campaign personally for that job, I don't know. I assume they're probably pretty small. And you could glad hand your way around and shake hands and meet people and say, you don't need Tom Daschle. The guy lives in Washington. Send me instead. You might even win, which would be great. But, of course, that would only demonstrate the necessity of going to these things, glad-handing people, shaking their hands and saying, vote me instead of him, and convincing them face-to-face, probably over a semi-long period of time. You can't show up on Election Day and do it. It's not going to work. You can't show up just a week before Election Day and say, well, I heard that you could influence policy if you showed up at one of these things. It might work in South Dakota, but in some larger parties it might not. Anyway, the point is you shouldn't have to compete against Tom Daschle, and we shouldn't be deprived of Tom Daschle's input about, is this person who wants our nomination a smart enough, savvy enough, cooperative enough person to work with? And sometimes it's an open question. So I want his advice, and I want your advice, and I shouldn't have to choose between the two, I don't think. He's valuable for one reason. You're valuable for a different reason. So I say, Tom Daschle, get out of the way and let regular people run for election to the Democratic National Committee. Could we compromise and say, I don't want Daschle to vote on the nominee? We could. I don't think there's a particularly good reason for it, but we could. And I'd be willing to talk about it. But is it rigging to say that he gets to go automatically so that you could also go? I don't feel that way. But if you, poke out one eye and look at it only with the other eye and say, Tom Daschle gets an automatic invitation, simply because he was elected statewide for many, many years from South Dakota and won the trust of the entire Democratic caucus along the way and became majority leader of the Senate and has invariably, incomparably more experience than I do in national politics. Sure, you could look at it that way, but I don't see why you both shouldn't be there. That's the thing. That's why this whole thing was invented. That's why they came up with. Now, there's also those special delegates that get named directly, literally bypassing the entire process by the chair of the DNC, and that's troublesome on its face. But it too it's got its reasons. Again, should the people that rise to the level of gaining the personal notice of the chair of the DNC, and whose opinions he or she believes to be valuable input at the convention, have to stand in competition with the rest of you. And also, so many of them live in and around Washington, D.C. How many of them could get through the process? Some huge number of people like that who have valuable things to say and valuable opinions and who have been institutional Democrats for a long time. And I know very many of you would see that as a problem in itself. It really isn't. That's your view of it, but I have a different one, and those guys should be there too. Now, is it abused? Is it sometimes the case that it's handed, those seats are handed over to people who are really nothing more than donors? Not to denigrate what donors can do. They do, in fact, play a valuable role, but they also, of course, money is looked upon askance. I know that, being the root of all evil and all that. Not me. The money is the root of all evil. I get it. So yeah, that process should probably be reformed, and there should be fewer appointments available to the Democratic National Committee chair, and they should be reserved for the best possible examples of Democratic engagement, but often it's not the case. But perhaps we could curtail some of that. But again, same process. Those people who we want to have at the convention shouldn't be pushing out regular folks along the way. We'll talk more about it after this break. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm getting a little further afield than I had hoped to, but we'll discuss a lot of that, and I guess we might as well save it for when we eventually have this massive cage match that we're going to stage at some point here on the air. But I don't know. I felt like I should lay out my position here since it's been something we've been talking about for a long time in the background, and I don't need necessarily to bring on a well-known Twitter celebrity or reporting celebrity or whatever you might try to label Ben Spielberg to have that discussion. I've been having it with a lot of you, and you're all sensible debate partners, and instead we're going to bring on a big verified Twitter name to have your argument on your behalf, and that will make a lot of you even more frustrated, and it's probably a microcosm of the Bernie Sanders problem all over again. How ironic that you would be pushed out of a debate about Bernie Sanders supporters' access to a national platform by a bigger name Bernie Sanders supporter than you are. But you can campaign for it. You can go out there and make a journalism career for yourself and get yourself verified, right? You can just walk into that. I understand it's very difficult to do. Not really an avenue available to most people, but getting involved in your local Democratic Party, it's available. It's just annoying as all hell. And, you know, you wish that there were more people like-minded with you who would take up that cause for you. And there are plenty, but there aren't enough to take over the Democratic National Committee just yet. It's a long-term project. You're going to have to work at it. I'll tell you how, and then stand aside and not do it. And you'll be a better person than me at the end. You'll know how to, and you'll have done it, and then I'll give you this radio show as a prize. How about that? All right, we should probably move on to some other topics, including, let's see, yet more about Saudi Arabia, which we threw at you yesterday. I just want to add this observation because there are some weird things going on. We hinted at some of it yesterday. It was weird. For instance, we learned that Jared Kushner had made some super secret visit to Saudi Arabia just a little bit in advance of this wave of arrests. And then there was the weirdness of the Yemeni, how do we say it, attacks as well. And then the helicopter that was shot down. Lots of other weirdness. And the one other major moving part, I cannot figure it out, so we'll turn instead to Think Progress to figure it out. The Saudi-Lebanon feud explained. Because in the middle of all this, the Prime Minister of Lebanon has resigned, which ordinarily would be a major story somewhere in the press, but he resigned on Al Arabiya television, I think, in Saudi. He went to Saudi Arabia for an interview and resigned on television. Like, maybe you want to do that in Lebanon, dude? Possibly. Why would this happen? There's a piece of Think Progress that is credited to simply a D. Parvaz, and I don't know D. Parvaz or what the D stands for, but I guarantee that it's probably better that it be abbreviated. He's heard the show, and he's like, I don't want to give David trouble by making him pronounce my first name. I'm just going to go with D. Parvaz. I should probably at least just click on it and see if there's any indication of the proper gender here so that I could get things correct, but there isn't one. And so naturally, being male, I assumed that D stood for is male as well. Probably a mistake. Certainly a mistake to assume it. But anyway, the Saudi-Lebanon feud explained. I'm glad someone can explain it. D is as good a person as any. In what can only be described as a fevered flurry of activity, the ruler of Saudi Arabia, I think it could be described as in various terms, but that's one, certainly. The ruler of Saudi Arabia, over the weekend, ordered the mass arrests of senior princes, political loyalists, I guess to those princes, and businessmen, accusing them of, quote, corruption. And there's some enormous controversy over whether or not there's really any corruption going on, or whether it pales in comparison to the corruption going on elsewhere, or whether it can correctly be classified as corruption. I don't know. I have no doubt that wherever there's that much money and power, there's something that could probably properly be pointed to as corruption. And some on the other side, too. So I don't know what to tell you. This is not my fight, these guys. In an unmistakable bid to centralize his power, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and here parenthetically it does say also known as MBS, that's driving me crazy, had 49 people arrested early Sunday morning and held at a posh hotel pending a firm application of justice. That's a quote, a firm application of justice. In Saudi Arabia, that, who knows what that can mean? You get decapitated in a firm application of justice. The whole thing is really quite strange. This is an act of cleaning house domestically that we have never seen before in the history of Saudi Arabia, but there's a logic to the madness, said Mirzad, oh my goodness, Boroujerdi. I'm guessing at the explanation of the pronunciation of that name. A professor of political science at Syracuse University. Basically, MBS is getting rid of everybody who was a potential or possible rival. Now, again, hey, we're not Ottomans here. They're going to the Ritz-Carlton, at least for now. I don't know. I felt compelled to tell you about that one in yesterday's show. But the arrests are just one element of what is shaping up to be an aggressive Saudi campaign to exert power in the region, or maybe a Emirati campaign to exert power in the region, as we discovered yesterday. While in Riyadh on a visit, Lebanese Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri resigned on television on Saturday over what he said was Iran's influence in his country. Iran, Saudi's Beit Noir, backs Lebanon's Hezbollah, which variously is pronounced Hezbollah. I've heard it all, and I don't know which one is right, but it's the same group we're talking about. Iran backs Lebanon's Hezbollah government and forces in the religiously diverse country, that would be Lebanon, where the prime minister must be a Sunni. They have some serious problems with managing, let's say, their diversity in Lebanon. And I guess that's just one of the governmental requirements. It provides some stability. The prime minister must be Sunni. He is, I guess, but now he's resigning. The president, Michel Aoun, I'm guessing Michel, M-I-C-H-E-L, Michel. I don't know how he pronounces that one. Aoun, A-O-U-N. I know woefully little about what's going on in Lebanon these days. He is a Maronite Christian who has the backing of the Shia-driven Hezbollah party. Ugh. Can you follow that? Now, the Saudi government charges that Hezbollah is declaring war on it, the Saudi government, which would, of course, be the Saud family. According to Reuters, in a vague statement to Al Arabiya TV, Saudi Gulf Affairs Minister Tamer al-Sabhan said that Hariri, quote, had been told that acts of aggression by Hezbollah were considered acts of a declaration of war, that is terrible syntax, against Saudi Arabia by Lebanon and by the Lebanese Party of the Devil. Now, I'm betting that they don't call themselves the Party of the Devil, but that's being imposed upon them by the Saudish. Supported by the Saudish government, Hariri, a dual Lebanese-Saudi citizen, accused Iran over the weekend of setting up a state within a state in Lebanon. I can believe that. And in his brief resignation speech, warned, I want to tell Iran and its followers that they are losing in their interferences in the Arab nation affairs. Our nation will rise just as it did before, and the hands that want to harm it will be cut. He also alluded to an assassination plot against him. That'll get him to resign or get out of business quickly, I guess. His father, the late Prime Minister Rafiq al-Hariri, was assassinated in Lebanon in 2005. Hezbollah has been blamed for his murder, but rejects any responsibility for it. Boroujerdi, if I'm anywhere close to correct on that, told Think Progress that he has been in touch with people close to Aoun, if I'm close on that one, who have denied that there's any kind of Hezbollah plot against Hariri. Anyone who knows anything about Lebanon and that is not me, knows that if Hezbollah wanted you dead, this I could guess, you would be dead, no matter where you are in the country, said Borogerdi. To say that Hariri's resignation was unexpected is an understatement. The resignation itself was a surprise, even to Hariri. Now, how could that be? Said Paul Salem, or maybe Salem, I don't know, Senior Vice President for Policy Analysis, Research, and Programs at the Middle East Institute. Remember, their name came up yesterday, too. But that's backed by Saudis, right? Salem, you tell me, was in Lebanon last week and met with people in Hariri's circle. There was no notion of him resigning until he was summoned back to Saudi Arabia in the middle of last week and ended up resigning. That's a problem for dual citizenships or people with dual loyalties. I worry about that in our country because Donald Trump, because I don't know what country he's loyal to. So the resignation is a surprise to the man who resigned himself. The political position that Saudi is taken, I love the way they refer to this, which was expressed in his letter of resignation, was not a surprise. Saudi Arabia has been very clear, particularly with President Trump's international visit there, with the very strong language against Iran and Iran's proxies that Trump and the Saudis used in Riyadh all the time, said Salem. The exact reason for the timing of the resignation is unclear, though fascinating. It could be as straightforward as pushing back on Iran's influence in Lebanon is part of the new strategy, as Salem, I'm going to call him that, put it. But he notes Hariri's business associates in Saudi Arabia had also been in trouble, and it's possible that being forced to resign is simply the product of Hariri being swept up in what is called an anti-corruption sweep in Saudi. These things, said, what are we going to do with this? Salem? I feel it's ridiculous. I mean, his first name is pretty American, Paul, right? Middle East Institute. It's probably all derived from Salam or Salem or some derivative of it anyway, even if he's named Salem. Okay, I don't know. These things are neither clear nor confirmed. There's even speculation that Hariri might not be allowed to leave the country being Saudi Arabia, which would be amazing. You kidnapped the guy. What's going on here? Reuters reports that Saudi denies preventing Hariri from leaving, although there are more arrests to come, and with the country's attorney general referring to Sunday's arrest as phase 1 of this purge. Hariri is a Saudi citizen. He's been involved, that's what it says, in he's been involved in a lot of business deals. Come on. And some of his friends have been jailed or are dead, said Salem/Salem. With the timing of this, we don't know if this was really exclusively a geopolitical Iran-related move, or was it just announced that way, but has more on an internal Saudi-related crackdown dynamic to it, he said. I can't even follow this syntax. Why did it have to happen on the same day, on a weekend? Well, I don't know. The U.S. position on this is unclear, although Trump has declared himself a staunch Saudi ally and might well support Hariri's resignation. We don't know. And he doesn't know either. He'll wait for instructions. It puts the rather baffling joint press conference held by Hariri and President Donald Trump in July into sharp focus. Neither of them knew what was going on. Amazing. That's where Trump painted Hezbollah as the enemy of the Lebanese people as an expressionless Hariri gripped the podium. Why? Hezbollah is the political party that dominates the country's cabinet. Trump also failed to note that Hezbollah's military arm plays a key role in fighting the self-proclaimed Islamic State, ISIS, at the country's borders with Syria. But who cares, right? Why bother knowing anything? The real dynamic is that the Iranians and their proxies and allies have been dominating Lebanon for many years, and they've been using force to ensure that domination. The big contest in Syria showed what they're willing to do to maintain their hold, said Salem/Salem, referring to the role Iran and Hezbollah play in supporting Syrian government troops there. I think this part of an escalating war of words between the Saudis and the Iranians really instigated by Saudi Arabia. But unfortunately for the Saudis, I don't think they're really as strategic as the Iranians are in terms of making these moves of the chessboard of the Middle East, said Boroujerdi. I think part of the problem here is that nobody can speak clearly and concisely in English in all of this. Their skills are great, but it's not translating. In terms of Lebanon, for example, all right, so you've asked Hariri to resign. Now what? How are you going to be able to undermine the power of Hezbollah in Lebanon? I don't see that kind of endgame for the Saudis in Lebanon, said Boroujerdi. Saudi's other proxy fights with Iran have not gone according to plan. The so-called Gulf crisis, which has seen Saudi Arabia lead a diplomatic coalition against Qatar, cutting off the country's borders and airspace in a bid to make it comply with a list of demands, among them distancing itself, Qatar that is, from Iran, hadn't seen any solution. The other proxy war in Yemen has not been going smoothly for Saudi, to say the least. Iran has been backing Houthi rebels there, still unclear on that pronunciation. And on Monday, Saudi announced it would be closing land and sea ports to stop the flow of weapons from Iran. In Lebanon, sacking Hariri was Saudi's only move, said Boroujerdi, who added that it's unlikely that Saudi has any long-term plans for Lebanon. The syntax is driving me crazy. Saudi has. Yeah. Any long-term plans for Lebanon. So the miscalculations that we've seen in Yemen and Qatar seem to have repeated themselves in the case of Hariri's resignation in Lebanon, said Boroujerdi, who foresees Saudi's next steps being more arrests in Saudi and possibly in Bahrain, where the government routinely cracks down on the Shia opposition they accuse of having ties to Iran. On Saturday, just hours before the crackdown/purge, the same day as Hariri's resignation, Saudi forces intercepted a Houthi missile north of Riyadh. Saudi officials blamed Iran, calling it a potential act of war, with Iranian authorities rejecting the accusation as irresponsible and provocative. I don't know who to believe in this. Of course, if the missile comes from Yemen, the Iranians didn't launch it. But the Iranians could certainly have provided it to the Yemenis to launch. I don't know. We don't know. We're not going to find out anytime soon. The worry in Saudi has been, said Salem, that with Iran and Hezbollah, quote, emerging victorious from Syria, they might pivot back to Lebanon to further nail down and fully control it. With Hariri's resignation, Saudi Arabia is signaling that it will no longer provide Hezbollah with the veneer of having a pro-Saudi, pro-Western prime minister such as Hariri. This may make some sense. This, said Salem, exposes Lebanon to a number of risks. Anything from new anti-Hezbollah sanctions to another war with Israel, which enthusiastically supported Hariri's statements over the weekend, calling it a wake-up call. What we're seeing emerging here is a sort of a triangle of U.S., Israel, Saudi Arabia, increasing the pressure or the volume of denunciations on Iran, and they can definitely refer to Hariri's resignation as a case in point, said Boroujerdi. Iranians, he said, are unlikely to overreact and be drawn into any kind of new conflict, but that doesn't mean Iran will ignore this shot across the bow. The Iranians and Hezbollah are very unhappy about what just happened and very worried because, indeed, having a pro-Western prime minister gives them more cover, said Salem. Iranian media has referred to the weekend's events as the first phase of Saudi Zionist plot against Lebanon. How could this even happen? Political turmoil within Lebanon or a new fight with Israel is bad news for Iran and Lebanon. At a minimum, this throws Lebanon into a governance and constitutional crisis. The prime minister has resigned. The president has not accepted his resignation. How is the government going to function? He said, noting that the spring 2018 parliamentary elections are now unlikely to happen. In terms of bigger risks, it's too early to say that big stuff is going to happen, but it's clearly put Lebanon back in the crosshairs of a country which is going to be contested regionally, said Salem. And I'm settling now on Salem at the end of the article here because that sentence didn't make enough sense for me to think that he pronounces it Salem. Bigger risks, in terms of bigger risks, it's too early to say that big stuff is going to happen. No, it's not. Big stuff is happening. But it's clearly put Lebanon back in the, I love this, the crosshairs of a country. You mean it's now made Lebanon clearly a country which is going to be contested regionally? The crosshairs of a country? What does that mean? All right. I think we've unraveled what that sentence meant, but clearly this is an extraordinarily complex situation, and what worries me is I don't even get it. There's no chance in the world that Jared Kushner and Donald Trump understand it. They're being led around by the nose by the new powers that be in Saudi Arabia, who turn out to be the powers that be in the United Arab Emirates. And one wonders why they would let this happen. And the answer is they don't know any better, and possibly worse. It may be that what's going on here is a quid pro quo deal. You let us re-engineer the Middle East the way we want, and we'll find Jared the $1 billion plus that he needs to bail out his stupid property at 666 Fifth Avenue. It might be as simple as that. I don't know. We may never find out. We may find out in a few years from now. I couldn't tell you how long it'll take us to get this thing straightened out, but I did see over the weekend I guess a repeat tweet storm from Jesse Lee, formerly with the Obama White House, pointing out over the last couple of days the number of times that he has been able to remind us to mark his words. We will find out that something extraordinarily corrupt happened during Trump's state visit to Saudi Arabia earlier this year. We don't know if we'll find out exactly what it is. We don't know when we'll find out, but it seems likely, especially in light of, as we said yesterday, the one comment that Donald Trump managed to choke out in the middle of all this turmoil in and around Saudi Arabia, a plea for the Saudis to take their state-owned petroleum company, Aramco, public, and to do it at the New York Stock Exchange, presumably, well, he says, because it would be great for America. I don't know why it would be so great for America, but I assume because friends of his would make lots of money. And wouldn't it be surprising if, wow, out of nowhere, Jared Kushner's relatives, but not him, because it would be illegal for him to trade on the inside information, found the $1 billion they needed by becoming instant bazillionaires in an Aramco IPO, and were able to save the family's fortunes that way. And P.S. Donald Trump made $1 billion too. And all we had to do was give control of the entire Middle East to the guys who maintain a religious police force inside their countries and rule these nations as, well, as personal holdings, which they are, as we are reminded from time to time. Okay, I don't know. We gotta, it was as confusing as hell to run through this article, but that's, I guess, part of the point. You gotta know how confusing this stuff is and how many moving parts and who's possibly stabbing who in the back, and then imagine all of that being dumped on the lap of a dotard like Donald Trump, who basically will be interested in none of it except, well, look, if I can't pick a winner in all of this that I actually prefer for policy reasons, can I at least take some money out of this? And that'll be, well, I guess, all it takes to get the ball rolling for him. Okay. There's more, but it's getting close to time when I'm going to have to close down shop and hand things over to Justice to take things away on the for the rest of the day on Netroots Radio, and then I got to go vote, right? But there's a couple other things we'll have to enter into the record. Of course, more developments. We've learned more and more as time goes on about what happened down in Texas at the latest mass shooting, and I guess we want to enter some of that on the record. And keep an eye on these things. One thing, one of the best tweets I thought of yesterday, sent to me by the Twitter account known as Strid340, STRID. You tell me how you would pronounce that out loud, if there is a way to pronounce it out loud. STRID 340. And this really put it remarkably well. By the way, he's as he describes himself, some guy in the VI, Virgin Islands. How you doing? Are you there now? How are things going? Some guy in the VI, do I have it right? Is it Virgin Islands or is it somewhere else? Who talks politics, financial markets, Stanford Cardinal, and the San Antonio Spurs. They say I'm witty, and they might be half right. That's pretty funny. Now, it's a nice picture of a beach, so I'm guessing VI, Virgin Islands. But he really captured everything here. And putting these headlines side by side, of course, you would have seen this one, I hope, from my retweets of it yesterday. Trump overseas responding to the shooting says the Texas shooting is a result of a mental health problem, not U.S. gun laws. Everybody recognized the problem with that, of course. But this was one of the first ones I saw to put it side by side with the headline from February. Trump repeals rule designed to block gun sales to certain mentally ill people. That is what they mean by dotard. He does not remember from day to day what his position on any of this stuff is. Also, want to throw out there an observation that I made jointly with others. That would be when we got the news of how the shooting ended. Lots of controversy about whether or not the armed neighbor did much of anything in all this. Trump defending him, but mostly defending gun rights and saying, well, he stopped perhaps another massacre. We don't really know. But essentially, for most of the day yesterday, the right-wing gun folks were insisting that this armed neighbor intervened and stopped the massacre. But of course, it's very difficult to say exactly that way, since the shooter had already succeeded in shooting everybody in the building. I mean, he could have gone back and shot them again so that more people would have died, I suppose. And it's overall a good thing that the guy got shot. But did he stop the massacre? Clearly not. He had shot everybody he came to shoot and took off in a car and then eventually shot himself in the head. But interesting reporting also about his having been spotted across the street prior to the shooting at a gas station and identified for some suspicious behavior. Then people knew something was going on because he arrives dressed, as they love to say, tactically, all in black and with body armor on, which is problematic all by itself. Just want to throw this other thing out there. Apparently, he also was wearing one of those face masks, black face mask with a skull on it. I don't know whether it was a full face mask or just the lower, like, scarf face mask with the skull motif on it. I just want to say, although they spent all day after the shooting on the right trying to insist, oh, well, he's Antifa. He's actually a liberal activist. Yeah, that didn't fly, but Google couldn't do anything about it. Apparently, they had a hand in promoting the fact that this lie was out there. I want to point out very quickly that skull motif thing is huge among right-wing, alt-right people and the militia types, and also, by the way, on SWAT teams and in the military as well. They love that skull. I don't know whether it means anything more than that, but there is an indication out there, thanks to Resisting Sherry, PhD, who tweets us, only me in D.C., that there is, in fact, a Southern Poverty Law Center report on the use of that mask specifically as a motif among the alt-right. We can talk a little bit more about that. I think that might be a huge clue to something we need to talk about in the future. Anyway, I've eaten up all the time afterwards, but I do want to hand things over to Justice and promote the upcoming version of his new offering very soon after this.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
So it's background briefing coming up today following the show, but coming soon, West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam. It'll be a Monday through Friday affair coming up right after our show. Justice will be serving up that cornucopia of abundance and all the news that's fit to read and much, much more. We'll tell you all about it in future days.